This is the story of the Mayflower Voyage. It begins in England in 1547. Henry VIII wants to divorce his first wife. The Roman Catholic Church says no, as it is against God. Henry had never been told no before, so he decided to separate himself and England from the Roman Catholic Church by creating the Church of England. This allowed him to divorce and behead as many wives as he liked, and became the first significant step in England's independence from the Church. 100 years later, and the Tudors are no longer in control. The Stuarts are reigning over England, and the churches are full to the brim. King James I has a clever idea: to publish the first edition of the Bible written in English. He had a near-death experience with the gunpowder plot of 1605 and needed to bring his people on side. This angered the church as it made the Bible more accessible to everyday people and therefore reduced the church's power. The church were right to be worried, as small rebellious groups began writing pamphlets and preaching their own sermons in the streets, believing that the Reformation hadn't gone far enough. These people were known as the Puritans and were on the more radical side of Protestantism. Within this group was a congregation led in secret by William Brewster in Scrooby Manor, Nottinghamshire. They had become so fed up with the religious laws of England that they fled to Leiden in the Netherlands. They developed their contacts and gathered the supplies and resources to create a new home in a mysterious place called America. Half of the group were excited about being able to pray and worship in a way they wanted, and the other half were excited about becoming rich. They had a great plan: 2 boats, summer departure for smooth sailing weather, land in northern Virginia. However, in reality, one boat sank almost immediately. They were late departing, which meant awful weather conditions, and they landed in the wrong place. The journey took just over 2 months. The boat was incredibly cramped. A few passengers died, one lady gave birth, one man fell overboard, and the ship's main mast had to be repaired during a storm. Amongst the passengers were William Brewster, the senior leader of the congregation, William Bradford, the soon-to-be governor who documented their journey in books, and William Mullins, who took 139 pairs of shoes with him. They approached land and encountered a problem. The laws and agreement had been written based on a specific area of land a few hundred miles south in northern Virginia. Together they had to write a whole new list of rules and laws to abide by, known as the Mayflower Compact. As they approached the land, it dawned on them that they weren't alone. This new world they had imagined wasn't new at all. Native Americans had lived on the east coast of America for generations. What's more, European travellers were known as slave traders and disease carriers to the Native Americans. The first few years were filled with conflict, violence and misfortune. The first winter in Plymouth Plantation was not as harmonious as Thanksgiving stories may suggest. Disease and famine spread throughout both communities. The Native Americans, members of the Wampanoag community, had declined in numbers before the Pilgrims' arrival and were now facing a bleak future. The Pilgrims, in a new and unfamiliar land, were struggling to adapt to this new way of life, and roughly half of the passengers died within the first 12 months. A young Native American man named Tisquantum agreed to help the Pilgrims. 10 years earlier he had been kidnapped by an English explorer and transported to Europe, where he had been rescued by monks in Malaga. This is where he learnt about the Christian faith and life in Europe. He later found safe passage to London, where he worked and learned the English language. He later returned home to the Patuxet tribe to find that his community had been destroyed by a devastating plague. He was introduced to the Pilgrims and worked as a mediator and translator between the two conflicting groups. He taught the Pilgrims how to find and grow certain foods and how to hunt and fish for native animals. Although friendships formed in the early years, The English always saw themselves as being on a mission from God to civilise the land. As more settlers arrived, more land was taken from the Native American people, and many wars were fought and lives were lost before New England became the place we know today. 400 years later, and Native Americans and English people are encouraged to collaborate once more to share their worldview and commemorate their heritage during this significant anniversary.